To be honest with you, Neil, it goes back to there's a lot of ill will towards Senator Hagel because when he was a Republican, he attacked President Bush mercilessly. At one point said he was the worst president since Herbert Hoover, said that the surge was the worst blunder since the Vietnam War, which is nonsense, and was very anti his own party and people. People don't forget that. You can disagree, but if you're disagreeable, then people don't forget that.
That was Republican Senator John McCain on Fox News yesterday explaining why exactly he's participating in filibustering Chuck Hagel's nomination to be Secretary of Defense. He says Chuck Hagel is too darn disagreeable. So says John McCain. Quote, in a heated dispute over immigration law overhaul, McCain screamed, "F you!" at Texas Senator John Cornyn, who had been raising concerns about the legislation. "This is chicken stuff," McCain snapped at Cornyn. Quote, "Are you calling me stupid?" Senator Chuck Grassley once inquired during a debate with McCain over the fate of the Vietnam MIAs. "No," replied Senator McCain, "I'm calling you an effing jerk." Quote, at a GOP meeting last fall, McCain erupted out of the blue at the respected Budget Committee Chairman Pete Domenici, saying, quote, "Only an a-hole would put together a budget like this." Offended, Domenici stood up and gave a dignified, restrained speech about how in all his years in the Senate, through many heated debates, no one had ever called him that. Another senator might have taken the moment to check his temper, but McCain went on. "I wouldn't call you an a-hole unless you really were an a-hole."
You can disagree, but if you're disagreeable, then people don't forget that.
The arbiter of disagreeable. It is rich to hear that as the supposed criticism of Chuck Hagel coming from John McCain. But honestly, I mean, it's not just John McCain's personal hypocrisy here. This is a Washington-wide thing. It has never been a problem in Washington to be a disagreeable person. It's actually the kind of thing that's worn as a badge of honor.
Did you really tell Senator Leahy, bleep yourself?
I did.
Any qualms or second thoughts or embarrassment?
No, I thought he merited it at the time.
Being disagreeable does not disqualify anybody from a high-ranking job in Washington. It never has. What really is going on here is not that John McCain doesn't like Chuck Hagel's tone. What's really going on here is Iraq.
He attacked President Bush mercilessly. At one point said he was the worst president since Herbert Hoover. Said that the surge was the worst blunder since the Vietnam War, which is nonsense.
John McCain's hang-up with Chuck Hagel is about Iraq. It's about Chuck Hagel during the height of the Iraq War going before the United States Senate and the American people and saying this.
I don't know how many United States senators believe we have a coherent strategy in Iraq. I don't think we've ever had a coherent strategy. There is no strategy. This is a ping pong game with American lives. These young men and women that we put in Anbar province, in Iraq, in Baghdad are not beans. They're real lives. And we better be damn sure we know what we're doing, all of us, before we put 22,000 more Americans into that grinder. We better be as sure as you can be. And I want every one of you, every one of us, 100 senators, to look in that camera and you tell your people back home what you think. Don't hide anymore. None of us.
That's what this is about. It's about Iraq. We should have known that this was John McCain's hang-up on this when his questions to Chuck Hagel during his confirmation hearings this month could not get past the Iraq War, which is over. But John McCain's obsession with it did have the silver lining of giving Chuck Hagel a chance to elaborate on his position on it.
You continued on and on for months afterwards talking about what a disaster the surge would be, even to the point where it was clear the surge was succeeding. Do you stand by those comments, Senator Hagel?
Well, Senator, I stand by them because I made them. And
were you right? Were you correct in your assessment?
Well, I would defer to the judgment of history to sort that out. But
the committee deserves your judgment as to whether you were right or wrong about the surge.
I'll explain why I made those comments. And
I want to know if you were right or wrong. That's a direct question. I expect a direct answer.
Well, if you would like me to explain why...
I actually would like an answer. Yes or no?
Well, I'm not going to give you a yes or no. I think it's far more complicated than that. As I've already said, my answer is I'll defer that judgment to history. As to the comment I made about the most dangerous foreign policy decision since Vietnam was about not just the surge, but the overall war of choice going into Iraq.
Not just about the surge. It was about the overall war of choice going into Iraq. Right. So is John McCain trying to relitigate that? The overall war of choice going into Iraq? Is he trying to relitigate that the decision to go into Iraq was a disaster? Yes, actually. Yes, that is what this is all about, an effort to rehabilitate the Iraq war in the American mind, to make it seem like it was a success, or at least that it wasn't a bad idea, or at least that it wasn't the biggest foreign policy disaster since Vietnam, or at least that it wasn't a scandal that ought to scar everybody associated with it in American politics for the rest of their careers. And because being wrong about the Iraq war was not just an individual scandal, but a big scandal, this ends up being a big project, this revisionist history. Until we come clean about this, until we get honest about it, until we can draw a line under it and say, you know what, that was a bad idea, until we are able to do that cleanly, this kind of stuff really is going to drag around behind everybody who wants to be in public office in the future, who was in public office then, or who was in a position to comment on it when it was all happening.
Do you believe that the people of Iraq, or at least a large number of them, will treat us as liberators?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you think
believe that we can win an overwhelming victory in a very short period of time?
Governor Romney, was the war in Iraq a good idea, worth the cost and blood and treasure we have spent?
It was the right decision to go into Iraq. I supported it at the time. I support it now.
Based upon what we knew at the time, we were very much under the impression as a nation, our president was under the impression that they had weapons of mass destruction, that Saddam Hussein was intent on potentially using those weapons, and so he took action based upon what he knew.
No, it wasn't based on what he knew. And the Iraq war was not a good idea. We went to Iraq to get weapons of mass destruction that were not there. Weapons that we knew were not there. There was no credible evidence of weapons of mass destruction in the first place. There was no credible evidence of a nuclear program. There were no ties to 9/11. There were no ties to al-Qaeda. None of the things that we were told were true were true. The government perpetrated a massive deception campaign on us. But as long as those who were wrong about the Iraq war, as long as those who did it can count on us not being blunt about that, as long as we as a country avoid coming to terms with what happened then, not only do you, Mr. It was the right decision, get to run for president, but you get to pick this guy to be your top foreign policy aide while you're running. His top foreign policy aide was Dan Senor, the Bush administration's chief spokesman in Iraq. How do you fail up into that job? Not only do you get to make that guy your national security expert, but the two foreign policy speeches at the Republican National Convention in 2012 get delivered by Senator We Will Be Greeted as Liberators and by the Secretary of the Smoking Gun Might Come in the Form of a Mushroom Cloud? Those are your two foreign policy experts? Those are your two foreign policy speeches? 10 years out, there is a major effort underway right now to make the war in Iraq seem like it was a reasonable idea at the time, to make it seem like at least we were all in it together in making this unfortunate mistake when we made the decision to go in. Actually, 10 years ago today, you want to know what was happening around the world? In 600 cities around the world, including dozens of cities here in the United States, there were mass street protests against it. Not everybody was wrong about this. We didn't all blunder into this together because we all believed what that lousy intelligence turned up. It didn't go that way. There was a deliberate campaign to deceive the public, and it succeeded well enough to start a war based on threats and stories and evidence that were not true. And if the revisionism that we are experiencing right now, 10 years later, is able to succeed, then we are doomed to repeat this again as a country someday. If we do not come to terms with what happened and how it happened, if we do not learn the lessons of that disaster as a country and how we were duped, how it worked, then history says we are doomed to repeat it. On Monday night, MSNBC's new documentary on exactly this question is going to premiere right here at 9 p.m. It's called Hubris, the Selling of the Iraq War. I'll be hosting it. Here's an exclusive preview clip.
General Franks is both a warrior, but also a wise and inspiring commander.
A declassified memo from November 2001 reveals that Donald Rumsfeld met as early as then with CENTCOM Commander General Tommy Franks to review plans for the decapitation of the Iraqi government. They discuss ideas of how to start a war. One suggestion is to create a dispute over WMD inspections.
This is a regime that agreed to international inspections, then kicked out the inspectors.
9/11 made it politically possible for the first time to persuade the American people to break a tradition of not launching offensive wars.
The pressure to find evidence falls heavily on all 15 U.S. intelligence agencies.
The extremely strong policy wind that was blowing at the time and that everyone in government corridors felt made it absolutely clear what was preferred and what was not preferred.
That is a portion of what is going to air on Monday night, right here at 9 p.m. It is a documentary based on the best-selling book Hubris by Michael Isikoff and David Korn. 10 years later, this is a story that could not be more timely. Monday, 9 o'clock, right here. We'll be right back.